Okay. We are good to go. Let me close out this window here. Let me remove my phone. How is everyone doing out there in lockdown and quarantine all over the world? I've been in lockdown for about 3 weeks, I think, maybe a month. And we probably have another 2-3 weeks to go. So how's everyone doing? Can you guys see us? Can you guys hear us? We know that the internet is getting very heavy. It is starting to bend a lot. Hasn't broken yet, but we're a little iffy on these streaming services because there's a lot of traffic now going through the interwebs. So hopefully we'll get through this live stream without any issues. We have in Moscow the host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle, who is in lockdown. How are you doing, Peter?
Yep. It really all came to me after Putin almost exactly 1 day ago when he said that we'll be on shutdown at least until the end of the month. And as Alexander Mikiris has so rightly highlighted in our last chat, is that it's largely focused in Moscow. So that it's a big city, but at least you know where to focus your attention. And I asked my boss this morning on What's Up, I said I was thinking about going into town because my local store, while it has all of the basics with no problem at all, I said, I'd like to get I'm kind of tired of the basic things. I'd like to maybe get some nice gourmet stuff, and so I could cook at home. And he said, probably not a good idea. I mean, because if you're stopped, they'll say, well, you have a grocery store next to you. What are you doing? Okay. And rightfully so. We've noticed, all of us, collectively, particularly the metro is really is the focus of the attention, and seeing some people that are so negligent, and it's just horrifying. And that was over a week ago, last time I was on the metro, and that gives you foreboding. It's like, the majority, obviously, social distancing, within reason. I mean, if you sit every other seat, stand by the door, give everybody room. And then there's a few of those bozos out there that just are completely oblivious what's going on, touching their face, touching people as they're getting out. And everyone's like, oh my God, what are you doing? There's always those people.
All right. And we have in London, the Oracle of London, who is also in lockdown, I believe, as well, is Alexander Mercurs. How are you doing, Alexander?
I'm doing very well. I mean, I'm extremely fortunate because, of course, I work from home. Peter, I would remind everybody, works from RT. He goes to work at RT, so he's had to change and rearrange his working schedules. But I work from home, so I'm one of these very fortunate people for whom the pattern of life has not changed so radically. But of course, there has been change. My wife now also has to work from home, no longer at the college where she taught and lectured. And we also are in lockdown, but I get the impression it's much, much looser here, in spite of our numbers being orders of magnitude worse than in Moscow. I mean, I was comparing, Peter, just today. A friend of mine in Moscow, sent me the decree that Sobyanin, who is the mayor of Moscow, published, which sets out, the various regulations. This is on the 2nd of April. I mean, it ran to 16 pages, and it was incredibly comprehensive. And another friend of mine from Perm, which is one of the, one of the cities in the Urals in the Russian regions, not by any means a big city, but he also sent me the regulations there, and they ran on for pages. We have nothing like that here. We don't even have a proper hotline working, which you do in Moscow, apparently. So there's no, and the quarantine, it's full of holes. So I have to walk my dogs. I go to the local park to walk them there because that's where I have to walk them. I see people, loafing around. I see them playing football. I see all kinds of extraordinary things. And incredibly, yesterday, I saw that they were still cutting the lawn. It seems to me the time to cut lawns, but they were cutting lawns. So it still seems to me a very incoherent and a disorganized response. And over the last couple of days, you've started to see criticisms of the government. I mean, I think Russia, last time I saw it was now, I think it's, well, testing many orders of magnitude more than we are in Britain. I think Russia is top along with the US and Germany. And Britain, we're only testing something like 10,000 cases a day. There's no testing. I saw the new hospital. There's pictures of the new hospital that's been built, which is just basically they've taken over a center and they've laid out beds and done all sorts of things there. So it seems to me like the kind of place where if you start putting patients with an infection, it's going to spread even faster. So it's still looking, very grim here. And a government, which I have to say this, I'm not somebody who throws around criticisms without cause. I don't think has been caught flat-footed and unprepared and is frantically trying to get itself organized, but is still far from doing so.
All right, well, save those thoughts, Alexander. We'll discuss all these things in our live stream. I want to remind everyone to hit the like, share the video with everybody you know. Check to make sure you're still subscribed because YouTube is unsubscribing a lot of our viewers. So if you can do a double check, we would really appreciate it very, very much. And don't forget, we also have a join button underneath the video as well, where you can join and become a member of the Duran community. And we have all kinds of good perks for our members. And hopefully we'll come up with some more things as well as we progress. All right, guys, where is everyone joining us from in the world of lockdowns and quarantines? Tassos is saying that he eats ice cream from his Duran mug.
That's a great idea. I should
As
try.
the summer approaches.
I think we could have some Duran feeding bowls. You should think.
Yeah, we could.
We certainly should. I'm drinking tea again, by the way.
We'll roll out all kinds of good stuff for the summer. Let's see. Nikos, Kalispera. Nikos, how are you? Seattle, Washington. Derek, a 7 a.m. stream. Where are you joining us from, Derek? From Nigel, London calling. Greetings from Belgrade. House Arrest UK. AJ. Hello, world. Manchester, UK. Chester, UK from Spain, Iron Horse. Oh boy, how is Spain doing? Iron Horse, they're having a hard time dealing with this. From Sweden, we did a video about Sweden the other day. Even Tucker Carlson had a segment about Sweden. Everyone's just curious what's happening there, the way they're handling the CV crisis and pandemic. From Netherlands, how are you doing, everyone in the Netherlands, Dubai, South Dakota, Ottawa, Australia. Canada's been quiet. We haven't heard anything from Trudeau or what's going on in Canada either. Also Australia as well.
Silence from Trudeau.
18 dead in Australia so far. 18 dead.
No.
Let us know how things are going in Australia and how they're handling it as well.
No.
Duran face masks, Tim Murray says.
Very difficult to find here, by the way, face masks. We've got,
Alexander McCurris, I was just prior to us convening right here, I went to my local store, nothing fancy about it, and at the cash register, they have gloves.
Well, there you go.
At the cash register, like picking up a pack of gum or a pack of cigarettes, and just right there.
Right.
Incredible. From Berkshire, UK, from Seattle, New Zealand, Athens, Greece. New Zealand again. Let's see, Zagreb, awesome. Quebec, Sweden. All right, from Russia, Elisabetta, how are you? In Russia, from the Netherlands, London here. 29 dead in Australia, okay. All right, let's get rolling, guys. The EU and what's going on. They just passed this new shore. They haven't passed it.
No.
They floated the idea of this new shore funding scheme. Let me read you guys a title from our team. Let's just play it fast and loose. Guys, let's just talk about what's going on, whether it's in the EU, we'll focus on the EU. If we want to talk about Russia, the US, and anywhere else, as these countries are trying to come to grips with the economic fallout of this pandemic. The title from RT says, Solidarity in Action. And they have in parentheses. EU Commission head apologizes to Italy, pledges 100 billion CV relief fund, which may not happen. This is what Ursula von der Leyen said to the Italian people, and I quote, "It must be recognized that in the early days of the crisis, in the face of the need for a common European response, too many thought only of their own ... problems." And so they have rolled out a scheme called SURE, which would provide a total of 100 billion euros, about $109 billion in loans to EU member states to prevent massive layoffs. The Italian government was not impressed. Matteo Salvini was not impressed. And they would like to see a lot more action. So what do you guys think of what's happening?
What is wrong with her? The whole sense of causality is backwards.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Okay? Because there was no action, people had to take action on their own. Get the sense of causality correct. That's ridiculous what she says.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. It's insulting to the Italians and to the Spaniards, in my opinion. I'm sorry, Alex, go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. Firstly of all, this is not yet confirmed. I mean, it's just been talked about by the...
It's an idea. It's an idea she's
It's an idea. It's floating. But I mean, the figures that she's speaking about, 100 billion, it's nothing. It's in the face of this situation. It's a drop in the water. I mean, Italy now owes around 150% of GDP. The United States is proposing to spend, was it $2 trillion? $100 billion isn't going to get you anywhere. It's not going to support the European economy. It's not going to support the Italian economy. Germany is spending 10 times that amount on its own economy. I mean, this is presented as an impressive package. It's nothing of the kind. And of course, it hasn't even yet been agreed. If it was 100 billion euros in actual physical aid, say face masks and ventilators and those sort of things to produce it, well, that would be something, but it would still not be anywhere near enough. But as an economic aid package at a time like this is hopeless. It's not going to, I mean, it's not going to even register if it even happens.
Well, that goes into the category, something must be done, so they've done something, okay?
Well, it's an appearance of action. It's like, you sort of dress it up, you give a apology, which you don't really mean, because let's be quite clear, she doesn't really mean this apology. And then she completely undercuts this apology by offering a plan, which, to be very clear, is as yet only a plan. Which is disastrously underfunded.
You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
All right, Peter and Alexander, I have a serious question about whether the EU is going to break up. Of course, we get very emotional, all of us, about the EU and whether they're going to make it or not. But I want you guys to take a very cold, hard look and try to answer as best you can. Do you think the EU will find a way to get out of this mess or not?
I don't know. I will come back to what we said on a video, that the EU, it has a genius for disastrously succeeding in kicking the can down the road. It has, if it's good at anything, it's that. Having said that, this is a crisis that is so enormous, so existential, that if it doesn't actually crack apart now, the day when it will eventually do so has been brought forward to an extraordinary degree. I mean, I think people in Italy are utterly exasperated. I suspect people are in Spain also, and I think people in Greece too. I think, it's touch and go whether it will survive this. It depends how long this pandemic lasts. But even if it does survive it, it's been gravely weakened and it's lost a lot of friends, remaining friends, which it doesn't have that many of anyway.
The problem is that because of the way the European Union was designed and implemented, is that you cannot imagine a world without it. And that's the poverty of the situation here. Because even if you want to get out, look what happened with Brexit. I mean, the forces against Brexit, against the people's will, I mean, they fought a pitched battle for 3 years, okay? So, I mean, even if you want to get out, there's a lot of forces that will deny you that. So I think, if anything, and the European Union has very little capacity of introspection, in my opinion. Will they take on board what's happening now? At some level, they have to, because they have to react to the public. But it's an ideologically possessed project. It's a cult. It's like a religion. You do not doubt the foundations of that cult religion, and that's what's going to make it very, very hard. Even if the laity, if I can keep using the metaphor, are outraged by it and they start picking up pitchforks. But you're gonna have, the clergy of this ideology within the European Union. They will resist to the very end, because that's their very essence. Okay, so it's the inability to imagine something different, and that's the gross poverty of the situation. And the European Union has showed itself bare for that.
Yeah, I think that is true, Peter, except that it's now even that that fact that it's the status quo is starting to crack. One shouldn't underestimate, first of all, the impact that Brexit has had. I mean, it was a titanic struggle to get Britain out of the EU, but it is out of the EU. And that's a sign to many countries that it can be done if people have to do it. But but
the Romans felt that until the city was burned to the ground.
I know.
Okay?
I know.
But the whole idea. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. But the other thing I would say is, it does seem to me that, and I'm closer to the ground of feeling in places like Italy and Greece. I get the sense that even some of the clergy now are starting to have doubts. I mean, it's all very well having, all your convictions, but when you are yourself in a sense of lockdown, when you're sensing that public order in southern Italy hangs by a thread, when you're sending frantic messages to Berlin and Brussels and Frankfurt for help, and you're getting these kind of strange and garbled messages. I mean, this thing that Ursula has provided is just, if I was an Italian, I would be outraged, frankly, and I would be offended by that non-apology. So I get the sense, and it's starting to appear in the Italian media, that, as I said, more and more people, even amongst the clergy, are becoming angry and are starting to question whether this thing really works for them. And by the way, and I come back to this, the other side of the story, the other side of the fence, Germany, which I also know well, doubts are spreading there also. They come from a different place, but again, people in Germany are saying to themselves, look, is this really what we want to be? Is this really what, how it works well for, is it really working well for us? The fact of the matter is, we had this extremely successful economic model for many, many years, but we are falling behind. We're no longer the great technological innovators that we used to be. We've fallen far behind in IT technology. We're no longer, we're not a significant internet presence. All of those things, you can see the doubts, and they're starting to affect people in Germany in the grassroots. So I think that the worm of doubt has crept in, even into the most unexpected places. So I'm not saying it's going to collapse tomorrow. It might do. I mean, but we are at a point, perhaps, of no return, realistically. Start going downward very fast.
Well, I mean, even if there was this kind of collective will at the groundswell that it doesn't work, it would still take a long time to dismantle it. I mean, that's the scary thing about it, is that it is something that moves in one direction, and to be able to undo everything. I mean, I think it was what Norway, they had an association agreement with the European Union. And I talked to a Norwegian parliamentarian, and she told me, she said, it was hard, really hard to get out of that. And, because this was when all Brexit was going on. And she said, I can't imagine what they're going through, because an association agreement is just tenuous, but even then. So again, I'll repeat what I said in the beginning of my answer. I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine something other, because that other has been so totally denied and not part of any kind of conversation.
Well, the EU, quickly to say this, the EU doesn't negotiate. This is a thing that people don't understand about. Somebody once described it to me. It's like putting your money in a defective slot machine. You put your money in and nothing comes out. Varoufakis has recently described this, and he's provided tape recordings of his meeting with Eurogroup ministers. He would just say things to them, and they would just then proceed as if he'd said nothing. The British found themselves with the same problem when they were trying to negotiate Brexit deals. And of course, the Norwegians have had the same problem too, because that's how the EU works. It follows its own tram lines. It doesn't want to move off them. But you have to be in a position of strength to be able to carry that off. If you're not, if you're in a position of weakness, then it starts to break down. Alex.
Yeah, Spartan Warrior Queen is with us as well, moderating. Thank you very much, Spartan Warrior Queen. You always do a great job moderating. You know that, Peter, listening to you, that's an interesting comment about the EU, in that you probably have a whole generation now that has grown up not knowing anything else other than the EU, not knowing anything else other than the euro.
Yeah.
I remember the drachma, I remember the lira, I remember the Deutschmark, but you have a whole generation that doesn't know anything else other than the European Union and the euro as currency. So it's going to be interesting to see, as the EU does fall apart, how this generation leads and what their thoughts are.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's the same generation that had to go through the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and now we have this one. See, that generation that has only known this status quo, it hasn't been particularly rewarding for them, okay? And if you look at, if we just go back a month, 2 months, look at the unemployment rate for youth all across the European Union, particularly in the southern tier. I mean, it was really, stagnant, and still the politics of austerity. And then you get this. I mean, this is a gut punch of unbelievable magnitude. Okay, so I mean, the way you pose that question is fascinating because it has so many different layers that you can look at. I mean, these are the people that's the only thing they've known, but it really hasn't really been a particularly, I was going to say profitable, fruitful experience, okay? Because it's always been associated with some problems, okay? Deficits, austerity, economic crisis, unemployment. So, I mean, that's really, so at one level you'd say you're right, that's the only thing they know, but I mean, to what level of attachment do they have to it, okay? And these are a lot of these people are gonna say, well, what if we can do something else? Because the people that designed this generation, the designers, it was forced through. This was forced, this is social engineering, economic engineering, monetary engineering, and it's not working, okay? It's certainly not working for young people.
Yeah, just like there's a whole generation that has known nothing other than, in Germany, nothing other than Merkel as their chancellor, or in Russia, they've only known Putin as president. So, I mean, this whole generation, these are the people that they've seen their whole life. Alexander, going back to that point of, everything that's happened to the EU, I made a list here of all the bad things that have happened. The financial crisis, 2008, 2010 austerity, the migrant crisis of 2015, sanctions against Russia, the Libya war, Syria, Brexit. I mean, this was going to happen sooner or later, the crash of the EU, but this pandemic just absolutely obliterated the entire union. That's because it's over. It can't recover from this.
Well, it's exposed in the brightest and most brutal way the underlying structural problems in this, in this rickety structure that's been cobbled together. It weighs down on people so heavily and so much. So yes, I think it will crack. And can I just say something about people's the force of inertia and people carrying on with what they think, what they know, but of course societies which have existed for a very long time do break down. I mean, the Soviet Union broke down. I mean, when it broke down, it had existed for 70 years. It wasn't just young people who'd not known anything else. And if we talk about the Roman Empire, which Peter was talking about, well, that had existed for around 500 years or 600 years when it started to crack, and the Goths arrived. So when you have a system that has these tremendous structural flaws, then, as I said, systems collapse can happen very quickly and very suddenly. And it can take a fairly small event, which arguably this is. I mean, you know, this isn't the Second World War. This isn't even Spanish flu. I mean, that's not, by the way, in any way. I want to make this clear. It's not in any way to understate the seriousness of the health crisis. I'm constantly reading people all over the place. We all have. Who are denying it. I accept the seriousness of the health crisis, but a viable and strong institutional structure in Europe should be able to cope with it. It should not find itself in an existential crisis because of it.
No, exactly. I mean, again, you know, coronavirus is not the Spanish flu. Okay, it's again, it's a totally different experience. However, you have this virus that is minuscule compared to what happened with the Spanish flu. But look how rickety and unprepared these societies are across the Western world, where you know, you have the medical system that is overloaded so easily, so quickly.
Yes.
And I think that really begs questions. I mean, it shows that you know, you're living on a foundation of sand. I mean, it all looks you know, it's a Potemkin village. It all looks nice and fine, and you have a huge propaganda arm always pushing it. But if you go inside, the walls are bare. And and this is what we've seen with this crisis. We've seen this here across the Western world. I mean, I did a talk yesterday. It should be on YouTube later today. You know, I think for the Western world is that these kind of things happen to other people in the world, okay, in distant places where they're poor and poverty and a lot darker than we are. And then that's been, that mythology has been destroyed, okay? And because it can happen anywhere. And if you're complacent and you have hubris and self-denial, you're gonna get hit harder. And that's what this crisis has shown. When you live in denial, and then reality comes and right into your face and forces you to start looking at what's really going on around you. The people do. The elites, well, that's a totally different question, because they have resources to protect themselves, and they will always use those resources to protect themselves. And that, you know, what I keep thinking about is that what's going on right now, we're all in lockdown right now. And I'm getting, I'll be honest with you, a bit depressed by it, okay? I try to keep active. That's why I wanted to do this today, to kind of keep my mind going and, you know, talk to people. But the aftermath of this could be horrific. And I think that's where we should move our conversation, because 10 million people in 2 weeks are unemployed in the United States. That is just unprecedented.
Did you see the chart?
Yeah, it's
through the years of unemployment, it kind of has, and then it goes.
It's simply unfathomable. It is from an economic point of view, it's something you can't even contemplate. Yeah. And that's just the beginning.
Do we know, Peter, Alexander, Russia has the UK? Do you know of any other countries that have reported any kind of unemployment figures or anything? Do we have any idea how other countries are faring?
Right. Let's look at other countries. I mean, Britain is in a terrible state. Unemployment is shooting up there.
Do we have any data? Do we have any?
No, I don't have the absolutely up-to-date data, but we are going the same way as the US. I mean, I was just hearing the news shortly before we came on, and we are looking at a recession here. Not a recession, we're looking at a depression on Great Depression type scale. And bear in mind, this is a country which relies very, very much on small businesses, some of which, by the way, have existed for generations. This is a country which is extremely ill adapted to confronting this kind of problem. Debt levels are very high here. I understand that there's very great problems with people in mortgage arrears, for example, and there is a very, very serious crisis. I mean, I wonder how many of these businesses will be open, and you know, some of the little shops that have been in existence, which Peter saw, some of them which have been in existence since the 18th century, they're now all loaded up with debt, Will they survive? I mean, I don't know. Russia's completely different. Firstly, debt levels are on a completely different level. Russia, because it's followed a orthodox monetary policy.
But Alexander, could you elaborate a little on the debt levels of Russia as compared to the EU, just so we get
Well,
an
all right,
understanding what those percentages are?
Okay, let's start. So Russia's sovereign debt is about 15% of GDP. Italy's is about 150% of GDP. Now, going into this crisis, it was around 130%. Zooming up at a phenomenal speed, Britain's is about 80% of GDP. The US is now probably over 100% of GDP. This is state debt. But of course, on top of state debt, there's also corporate and private debt. Now, what we know about corporate debt is that it's gone through the roof in all the major economies. In Russia, it's actually fallen. I mean, this is the other thing. They actually deleveraged after the 2008 crisis. And personal debt, it's the same. Now, in Russia, personal debt sort of started to click up about a year ago. The central bank then became very concerned about it, and actions were taken to sort of flatten out the curve. So what you have is, in Russia, a state with massive amounts of fiscal ammunition, financial ammunition. You have a banking system, which, by the way, is largely public owned. It's dominated by 4 big state-owned banks. So there's no issues of solvency at that level. And they have huge reserves. In Britain,
very conservative.
Very conservative. In Britain and the United States and Italy, we are not in that situation. We're in the opposite situation. We don't have reserves. We're loaded up with debt. People are heavily in debt on their homes also. I mean, bear in mind, one of the other problems is an awful lot of debt in Britain is tied up in mortgage debt. It's also true in the US, but it's even more in Britain. So if house prices collapse, and who is buying houses realistically at this time, then a lot of that mortgage debt is going to become extremely oppressive, because the value of the houses will be less.
And you'll have people underwater.
You have people underwater. So there's all those huge problems. And as I said, and we have, especially in Britain, and by the way, in Italy also, an economy that relies very heavily on small businesses. In Italy, we all know about the leather makers and the shoemakers and the textile workers, all of these people doing small things. In Russia, there is a lot of small business now. There are a lot of SMEs, but it still tends to be dominated by big companies. They are still there to provide a big spinal support for the economy. And of course, the state has a much bigger role in the Russian economy than it does in countries like Britain and the US and Italy. So it's able to provide levels of support which are just not achievable here. And why has this happened? It's partly because, let's be clear, the nature of the economic system as it has evolved in the West has tended to exacerbate all of these problems. We've run very loose monetary policies. We've engaged in heavy money printing. We've financialized the economy to a great extent. That means more and more debt has been created. That means that business has become, wealth has become extremely concentrated. And that also means that reserves, and this comes even down to health services, things are running always at the margin. You don't have much slack in the system. Russia has tremendous slack. Now, for those who understand motor cars and interested in motor cars, I'm an enthusiastic motorist, by the way. That's another story. Motor cars, you have engines. An engine has horsepower and it's got torque. Horsepower is its sort of achieved output. So you have very high horsepower economies in countries like Britain, the United States, and that's what the GDP figures are catching. But if you're looking at underlying mass, the actual size of the economy, what it's the level of economic activity, that the pulling power, if you like, of the economy, China and Russia are in a different league. So you look at what people, when they look at statistics, they're looking at horsepower and they're underestimating torque. If you drive cars, you know that it is torque that makes driving a car effortless. It means that it can sort of shift and adapt much more readily than a sort of small engine but high output engine can do. It has that tremendous relaxed quality that, as I said, that the small engine simply doesn't have. And that's how Russia is and China is compared to an economy like Italy or Britain.
Peter, sanctions against Russia. Peter, EU sanctions.
Also, I think it's really important to tell our viewers here is that Russia deleveraged itself from the Western financial system after 2008, 2009. It's very important.
That's what I want to ask you. EU sanctions against Russia, a blessing?
Oh, absolutely.
And now it's become very, very apparent that it really was a blessing for Russia, not for the EU.
Again, you have to compare the United States and the European Union. The European Union, its sanctions against Russia are voted upon or consensus driven every 6 months. In the United States, it's passed by Congress. So Congress will never undo those sanctions ever, okay? There'll be never any political will to do it. The European Union is in a different situation, but because the US, because of its leverage over Europe, and it's Europe's fault that it allowed itself to be put in such an inferior position, will continue to go along with it. But the sanctions against Russia all across the board is been to the detriment, particularly of the European Union, not to the United States, because the level of trade with Russia was very little at the time. So, I mean, the Americans pushed something that there's no cost to them, a huge cost to the Europeans. And so, and actually an advantage to Russia, because Russia with import substitution has been, essentially, from all I know, has been able to replace everything that was sanctions. I mean, they don't, and so Russia has no real interest in that. I think that the vote that was at the United Nations Security Council, I think it was something that was appropriate, that all sanctions should be dropped and we should all work together to work against this virus. Of course, the small-mindedness of the United States and its allies, and I think it was Georgia was also there, refused. So, I mean, so they pay petty politics at a time when we need a global solution to this, because that's very different definition of a pandemic.
Alexander, can you explain very quickly the Eurobonds and the ESM, two ideas that are also being floated in Europe and that it's causing a very obvious and big rift between, I would say, the North and the South?
Right. I mean, this is in fact, I mean, is the heart of the present quarrel. The idea of a Eurobond is that it's a bond. A bond is, companies float bonds, countries float bonds. Bonds is a kind of IOU that you float it on the money markets, money comes in, and then you use that money to borrow, to spend, and as part of that bond, you pay interest. It's a way of raising capital. Now, what some people in the EU have been calling for, they've been calling for it, by the way, ever since the 2008 crisis, but they've also been calling for it increasingly now. Southern Europe is calling for it to get it through the corona crisis. The idea is that the European Union will float bonds. So, the German government floats bonds, the Italian government floats bonds when it can, Greece floats bonds, Britain floats bonds, the US floats bonds as a treasury bonds. But the EU, which is not a country, up to now has not floated bonds, and it is not allowed to, because it is not a country. And if you float a bond, you obviously have to pay interest on the bond, and that means some kind of treasury system in order to pay that interest. So what the Southern Europeans want is for the EU collectively to float bonds, to raise funds to support Italy, Spain, Greece, or France even, through this kind of crisis. The Germans and the North Europeans are adamantly opposed to this idea, because of course, if you float a European bond, all the countries of Europe, including Germany, the Netherlands, Slovakia, Finland, they all act as co-guarantors of those bonds, and they all have to contribute to the interest payments on those bonds. So in effect, if you have a euro bond, it shares the debt across the whole of Europe. It means everybody, all the European economies, are jointly liable for EU debts. Now, what the northern tier states are saying is we should absolutely not go down that road. Under no circumstances are we going to guarantee debts, with EU debts, which in effect means guaranteeing Italian debt, guaranteeing Spanish debt, guaranteeing Greek debt on the international markets. What we will do instead is when assistance is needed, we will provide it through the so-called European Stability Mechanism. This is a fund that was created during the Eurozone crisis between 2011 and 2012, which has 500 billion euros in it. And so it lends money, it's like a bank. It lends money to various EU countries that find themselves in trouble, but it imposes conditions as a lender upon those countries. So those are the bailouts that we hear about. When Greece borrows, when Greece went for those bailouts, what it actually received was money provided through the European Stability Mechanism. That was what that was all about. And those bailouts come with conditions. Bonds, because they are all European, obviously they don't come with conditions. So that's the major division, because the Germans say under no circumstances will we guarantee or take on any liability for South European debts. The South Europeans and the other distressed countries are saying we can't accept any more bailouts. We have to have the entire financial firepower of the entire union behind us if we are going to get through this crisis. And under no circumstances will we accept another bailout with all the conditions which will come with it. I hope that's clear.
Very clear.
Well, and the conditionality is essentially is that the Minister of Economics or Trade is basically works in Brussels or works in Frankfurt. Okay, I mean you're signing away your sovereignty, your economic.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, and I'm quite serious about that. I mean, they can give a nod, yes or no, to a minister in one of these member countries. I mean, yeah. That's the conditionality. Okay, it's called a straitjacket in my parlance. Okay?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about euro bonds or corona bonds are just another form of euro bonds. Is of course if they existed, that would undermine German sovereignty. The Germans won't have their own sovereignty on these issues undermined, but they insist on the sovereignty of Italians, Greeks, Irish, Portuguese, Spanish, all those people. They can have their sovereignty undermined by having these massive conditions attached to them, which are then enforced through the various EU institutions. So you have this fundamental asymmetry, which people, of course, in Northern Europe don't seem to be so conscious of, but there we are.
It moves us, though, doesn't it move us towards an EU superstate, the bonds? Moves us closer to an EU superstate. So why would Germany be against that?
Well, because Germany doesn't want to be a...
Isn't that Merkel's ultimate goal, though, in the end, as it is Macron's?
There are different perspectives of this, and we've discussed this on previous programs. Now, Macron is an enthusiastic supporter of Eurobonds. He wants to have an EU superstate with the government in Brussels, which, remember, is a predominantly Francophone city, very close ideologically, politically to Paris. I mean, it's got that kind of connection. So he wants an EU superstate with an EU treasury, an EU central bank, EU bonds, EU taxes, an EU army. He wants all of those things. That's his policy, more Europe, as he calls it. What Merkel wants is, obviously, she wants an integrated Europe, an EU single market with a single currency, but she wants Germany controlling it. Her perspective is a much more German-focused one. So she doesn't want to share, and mind you, well, what she wants, of course, we can never be completely sure, but certainly Germans don't want to share responsibility for debts everywhere, because the whole point about Germany is that it's a high savings economy, it's a debt-averse economy, it's a high investment economy. It doesn't want to be pulled down by the rest of the debts of the EU. They like the system as it exists now. It suits them very well with the euro. Certain parts of German business have effectively a captive market throughout the EU, because that's what having a single market with a single currency is all about. But they don't want to subordinate their economy to Brussels. And by the way, there are provisions in the German constitution which apparently preclude that.
Yeah, well, keep in mind the euro for a lot of Germans is just the Deutschmark light. Okay, it's the euro. Essentially it's the Germans that determine monetary policy, and that was the deal in getting in on it. Okay, yes. If you look, look at what happened in Greece. The biggest beneficiary was Germany at the end of the day, at the expense of Greece, and that's how it's built. Okay, the European Union is a very German, ideologically centric operation in terms of monetary policy, okay? And they're never going to walk away from that. And Macron's a fool. You give that guy the keys to the bank? No way. The Germans never do.
The way to understand this is that Macron wants a united Europe which controls Germany. Merkel wants a united Europe which is controlled by Germany. That is the fundamental division between the two of them. And it is a real division. It explains why Macron, who is a committed integrationist, is the major proponent of keeping the Schengen agreement intact, keeping free movement, keeping having Euro bonds and all of those things. Merkel wants integration when it suits her, but she doesn't want it in a situation which would diminish her power.
Right.
And of course, more and more Germans are questioning whether this works for Germany anyway, because it's not really. And one shouldn't underestimate the extent to which Germany has to compromise all the time with people like Macron. And that is becoming increasingly uncomfortable for Germany. And many, many Germans also say, this system of having captive markets isn't good for Germany either. Firstly, it makes us unpopular, and Germans do care about this. Secondly, it's bad for those countries, and I know there are a lot of Germans who care for that too. We mustn't run away with this idea that all Germans are cold-hearted, callous, mercantilist people. That's nonsense. But also, they're saying if you're in effect featherbedding the German economy, so it has no reason to compete or adapt with the much more dynamic economies of the other great economic powers, of China, of the US, possibly, Russia fairly soon. So
India as well.
India as well. And of course, the need to maintain the single currency is creating havoc within the German financial system, because the Germans are being forced to accept a negative interest rate policy, which is creating havoc with the German savings culture, which Germany has always had in order to build up capital, to accumulate capital, which is necessary for its high investment economy. So, I spoke of the Germans. In Merkel's conception, Germany is a beneficiary. More and more Germans question the extent to which that is true. I'm sorry, these have been rather long lectures. I hope people will exercise a little patience with me on.
We'll get to the super chats soon. I've got a couple more questions, and then we'll get to the super chats. But To me, it sounds, Alexander, Peter, that Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Italy, Spain, by calling for the Euro bonds, the Corona bonds, they're also pushing for more EU, are they not?
They are. But of course, again, you have to make a distinction between the elites in these countries and what the general population feels. The elites are pushing for these bonds because they feel that the whole thing is crumbling around them. And it's the one way that they can, because remember, their own position within their country.
Do you mean the elites within the countries, like the elites in Ireland, the elites in Greece?
The elites in Ireland, the Greek elites in Greece, the elites in Italy. Because remember, the Greek elite and the Italian elite is now completely invested in the EU project and derive their legitimacy to it.
And these elites have in the back of their mind that we're together, collectively, unified, we're too big to fail. Okay.
Well, exactly. Well, that's true. That's a very good point, actually. But what people on the street, in the shops,
very different.
The tavernas may be feeling, in the leather, the leather goods makers, those the shoemakers you find in Italy, the people who do the tuning of the Ferrari cars, what they feel, that may be profoundly different.
All right, Peter, final question, and then we'll get moving to the super chats. China, Russia, EU, US. When we get through this, who do you think is going to be winning? Who do you think is going to be losing? Which countries do you think will get through this in a better position than others? And I put the EU, I don't want to say EU as a country, but let's put it as a block. Say when you're looking at these blocks.
Picking winners and losers in this one is a bit difficult, and maybe it's not even the right terminology. Who will recover from this? Probably, first of all, recover and be able to move forward in a positive direction. I think China will, because it's a command economy, so it can pick winners. It can invest where it wants in what sectors. I mean, I've been going through the think tank world, like the national interest I was looking at before we started our podcast. It's so fundamentally anti-Chinese. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I understand the national interest, America's interest. I mean, that's their whole reason to exist. And I get that, okay? But some of these things are just ridiculous. The European Union, winning will be called survival. If they survive it, okay, that will be winning for them. One would hope, but I'm not going to hold my breath. There's this, they need introspection, and they can't do it. I mean, because they're driven by an ideology, and an ideology it's become a deity for them. So by definition, it's the people that did something wrong, not the idea. Okay, the United States is in a totally different category because if people have never been there, I always talk about Washington and the power of the establishment and all that. But the United States is a very decentralized place in many ways, and its medical system is very, very weak. It's way behind the rest of the world because it's just driven purely by profit. Okay, and when you get a crisis like this, you can't attend to the most basic things. I mean, they're driven to cosmetic surgery. I mean, it's selective stuff. That's how they make their money. All right, and they have a very small pool. I mean, millions and millions of people, but that's a small percentage of the population. So the medical system is driven to cater to the needs and wants and frivolous wants in many cases of a very powerful minority. And when you need a ventilator, which is a pretty basic thing, and they come up short. So, and then the unemployment that we're going to see, the disintegration of different sectors of the economy. This is going to be very, very long. It's going to be very, very painful. Anyone that thinks they're going to bounce back in a quarter is just delusional. I mean, really delusional. And look at what we're doing right now. And look at how I make my program right now. I do it with a laptop, an internet connection, okay? And I use free software, okay? A lot of people, there's going to be a major rethink of how the workforce works, okay? And do you need these people anymore? It's very interesting what's going on. The world is going to be a very different place. Russia will come out fine. They closed the border early. A lot of testing that's been going on. They basically nipped it in the bud. Of course, there are individuals that are careless. They're in every single society. Alexander Mikuris has already given us examples of this, that people don't take it seriously. But as I said, I think to both of you before we started here, I asked my boss, you know, it would be all right if I went to the center of town because they have a supermarket there. My shop has very limited selections. I'd like to go into town. And he said, don't do that. And if the police stop you, they're going to say, why didn't you go to your corner store? Okay. I mean, that's how much they're taking it seriously now, because they're pounding down that curve. And so the shelves are stacked to the ceiling. At my corner store, they're selling gloves and masks at the cash register. You know, like picking up a pack of cigarettes or Tic Tacs. All right. So there's a consciousness here. The government, Putin addressed the nation yesterday. The mayor of Moscow is constantly in touch with the emergency ministry, which they send out SMSs to people from the emergency ministry. So, and they tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And everyone that has a phone up to the major carriers gets that message, and we all get it at the same time. So I think Russia's going to come out of this fine. It's really the European Union and the United States. I mean, there is such a world of hurt coming to the United States and to tens of millions of workers. Like I said earlier, it's difficult to comprehend. I'm a historian by trade. What happened in the Great Depression, everyone thinks it was the stock market fell and they went into a Great Depression for a decade. No, it didn't. It was a slow moving process of government indecision, bad decisions. But what we've experienced now is something that has happened in 3 weeks, unprecedented. I mean, it is happening so fast, it's hard to comprehend what is happening and to start conjuring up ideas to react to it. And Congress took a vacation for 3 weeks. It's amazing. All right. The elites are very much out of touch, and the media just doing this as a weapon to go after Trump. I mean, future historians of the American economy will think these people were clowns. The country is disintegrating. The economy is disintegrating for the middle class, what's left of it, and there won't be much left of it after this, which will create social tensions that are hard to comprehend. And I always throw in the interesting caveat. Americans have a lot of guns, okay? And so I think there's going to be a very strong populist a reaction to this, a populist reaction on the left and the right, okay? And the interesting thing is that Bernie Sanders was a dud, I mean, a complete dud. And you're going to see his following. They're going to come to the conclusion they don't need him as a leader at all because he is completely caved in. And Donald Trump, battling for his political life right now, he's doing a pretty good job. The optics of it, at least, I'm going to hold back my verdict on his actions. I don't know yet, but he's marshaling all of his forces. I think he tripped up in the beginning badly. And thank God for Tucker Carlson that grabbed him by the collar and said, this is something real. Okay, history is going to be kind to Tucker and all of this too. But we're in the middle of a tsunami, and I keep looking at the economic indicators coming out of the U.S. This is something that we've never seen before, and it's happening so fast. So I hope that was kind of a basic answer to your question.
Very, very well said. Very well said. Alexander Peters said they closed their borders.
They did close.
We're going to see a lot more friction in the way people move around in the world, aren't we?
Well, I think we will actually, and I think perhaps we should. I mean, let's be straightforward about this. I mean, one of the things about globalization has been a lot of things. It's been about having a unified financial market so that capital is able to move around incredibly fast. Unified markets so that businesses can relocate, from the US to places like Guangzhou in China without any problems. Unified standards and regulations, and of course unified movements of people, so that you can have it's a complete
Schengen.
package. Exactly, it's a unified package of things. And what has now happened is that we see the enormous problems that this causes. So there's problems in the financial system. as there were especially in 2008, they get transmitted immediately all over the world. So there's a problem with, banks in the United States or banks in Germany and France. People always forget, by the way, that the first sign of distress in the financial system in 2007 was with the French banks. It's a fact which is very little known, but it's true. So that immediately gets communicated all over the place. We also see many people in the US increasingly, and I think with very good cause, complaining about the fact that it's drained jobs out of the United States, and they've gone to China and places like Mexico and wherever. And of course, we see these vast movements of people going where, going to rich countries, doing what they do there. And that has resulted in the spread of infections to an extraordinary degree. So, who knows? I think, globalization very, very obviously has major, major problems. And I can't help but think that it's going to feed, this is all going to feed the doubts that many people have had about globalization for a long time. The other thing is, which countries have coped with these two crises, the 2008 crisis and this current crisis that we're going through now, best? The answer is those countries which have strong states and strong governments. Russia has a strong state and a strong government. China has an extremely strong state and a very, very strong government. Italy, the government there is in a mess. Greece, it's in a mess. France, completely broken down. Germany, because it's been to some extent insulated from the problems, we see that parts of the system are still working very effectively. I mean, the health system, the Robert Koch Institute, all of these things, they were able to click in and work very fast, but not with much political leadership from the center. Yeah. Merkel has been invisible throughout the whole crisis. It's all happened around her because the German administrative system is still in good working order. Not true in other places.
The interesting thing too is what this crisis has shown is so few people willing to step up and take responsibility. Well, I give Trump credit for that. I think he's definitely stood up. But,
absolutely.
In the UK, I have my doubts. All through Europe, I have my doubts. And then I just mentioned it, then you have the US Congress go on vacation for a few weeks here. They don't want to be held responsible. None of them do. I mean, this is an extraordinary dereliction of duty. Okay, and this is part and parcel. I wish we had Dima Babic here of the neoliberal ideological order. Okay, and I think the history will look poorly upon the events right now and the decisions or lack of decisions being made. I'm going to keep. I guess for the next few months. I hope it's only for the next few months, and I'll be the defender of the working people and families, because that's my point of reference in all of this here. Yeah. I don't care about billionaires. They're a pest, in my opinion. Okay, what I care about is where I came from, the middle class, and now we're death is knocking at the door, and we went out there going to help the pillar, the most important pillar of Western society today, and that is the middle class. It's an open question.
All right, let's get to the super chat, guys. Anything else that you want to add?
No, I just want to very, very quickly say which countries will come out strongest from this. Those with strong states. And China, I think, will come out stronger. I mean, I'm also with Peter very worried about some of this enormous recrimination and finger pointing that's now going on between the US and China. And I mean, I don't like it, and it fills me with foreboding. And I think these kind of recriminations don't help at this time. China will come out stronger from this. Russia will come out stronger from this, I think. I mean, there's been they do seem to have the situation under control. The number of new cases has fallen sharply today. That may just be, an anomaly. We shall see.
You mean Russia?
In Russia, yeah. I mean, it was 770 yesterday. It was 600 today. So that's quite a sharp decline.
And that's following the projections that I told you guys.
Yeah, I know.
We're looking at April 1st, the first, right at the end of the month, beginning of the month. That would be the very critical time because of the incubation period. And fingers crossed.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say
at least another, 36 hours,
even longer, I'd say, Peter. I mean, one day, one
Yeah.
mustn't put too much on it, but it doesn't seem to be expanding too fast at the moment. They seem to have it under control.
And they've been able to confine it essentially to Moscow.
To Moscow, exactly.
And the other cities that they've actually been able, they found the person that was infected and who else was infected. They found a point of origin. They've done a really good job on that. Obviously, Moscow is a vast, huge city.
Yes.
And I think up until a week ago, the city is essentially 12 million people at night and about 14 million during the day, because that's people coming in from the immediate regions around. That's been shut down. Okay, so now you've been able to. Now you have the population that you need to start focusing on. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm in quarantine, everybody. I can't really tell you how effective it is because I'm inside all the time, or I walk my dogs. But I'm constantly with my friends on WhatsApp, and they're telling me what's going on. And it looks like it's being taken. The authorities certainly are taking it very seriously.
Yes.
So we need 36, 48 hours to see if that curve has been beaten down.
I mean,
Alexander.
US has been damaged. The EU is in an existential crisis. The US will come through, but it's been badly damaged. Carry on.
The US will come through, I think. I agree
the US will come through.
The EU is wrecked. But Alexander and Peter, I want to push back a little on the China part, because I know that you've been watching Tucker Carlson, Alexander as well, and in the media in general. I mean, people are pissed off with China, the media as well, whether you're looking at Fox News or now even the New York Times, and even some of the neoliberal outlets are also starting to bang on China as well. I mean, we know that we're entering a Cold War type of
absolutely. They will.
No doubt about it, but
there's no question.
We've been in a Cold War.
Yeah, but now it's obvious.
But I think this is a fascinating discussion. Let me just take a couple layers of it, just real quick here. Okay, I agree with you. Because of the failings, particularly of the healthcare system in the United States, the establishment is very sensitive to that, because they know that they're the bad characters in all of this. Okay, the majority of Americans want something. The vast majority of Americans want some kind of public option, and that's been driven by the polls. Okay, it doesn't mean socialized medicine, a public option. Okay. And that is something that the elites won't accept, because they have such a profitable position. And so there's this knee-jerk reaction. Oh, our healthcare system is failing because of the Chinese. No, it's failing because you weren't prepared for a pandemic. Now, fine, that's one layer. Another layer is, very importantly, you have a good part of the elites in bed with the Chinese already. Now, that's going to be a point of reckoning for them. Okay, I think creating this propaganda program to hate China, well, it's just only going to go so far. I mean, the more you push that agenda, then you're going to have to say, well, who in Washington takes their money? Well, what corporations are taking their money? How many of them have joint ventures with the Chinese? I mean, you can push that just so far, and then there's going to be a major reckoning. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with how Tucker Carlson is approaching this, okay? Not necessarily, but when he does press that lever, that button, it points to who in the elites are involved in this. I like that a lot, okay? A whole lot. Because it's the elites that sold the middle class out to China. It wasn't, any particular politician or policy. It was the elites that drove all of the TTP and all that. That was elite driven. It was corporation driven and even written. Okay, so going against China in the way they are, it's very prickly, because it will expose a lot of other weaknesses that are out there. I know for the Sean Hannity types, it's China's fault. Well, that's kind of that's deflecting, and that's trying to pivot away from the really harsh realities that the America's economic and financial elites sold out the American middle class decades ago, and we're only seeing it in stark relief now.
But Alexander, can you go off? And I agree with what Peter said, and I also like the way that Tucker Carlson kind of hits on the elites. I like that. But my point on this is, isn't there? I mean, China does have to take some responsibility in getting the ball rolling for what we're all facing today. Right. I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
They're not the most transparent of governments.
No.
And you have whether this virus started, God knows, I don't know where. None of us really know. No. But let's just say it was these wet markets. China does have to do something about this.
Oh yes, I agree.
I mean, because they're back in operation again.
There are two things.
And my point on all of this is somehow all this inertia and this ball rolling down this massive mountain now, someone pushed it. And you have to say it did start in China.
Right. Let's say two things.
I'm just trying to say that.
And I have consistently said this. I mean, the Chinese botched their initial response. I say botched it. I mean, you could actually put an even worse interpretation on it. For 2 months, they didn't take it seriously. They weren't as transparent as they should have been. They deserve all the criticism they're getting for that. Well, maybe some of the things that have been said, I think, go altogether too far, but they deserve a lot of criticism for that. The trouble is that I get the impression that there are two things that are driving the criticism of in the US of China. One is justified criticism of the Chinese handling of the initial part of the crisis. But the other, I have to say this, is that I also get the sense that many Americans, many people in the American political system are extremely unnerved and angry because China, when it got its act together, coped with the health crisis better than the US is currently doing. So I think that they are both angry with just cause about the original cause of the problem, and they are angry also to some extent with themselves for the fact that they see that the Chinese are handled this situation when it did get serious and out of hand. In China, they handled it better than the US has done. Now, can I just say something?
Because I see it in the live stream, Alexander and Peter. When you bring up China, people get very upset. You can see everyone take sides. I mean, it's a very.
What are you going to do then? Okay. What are you going to do then?
Well, can I just say?
Okay. I want to talk about that. Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
There will be look, I've spoken many times on our programs about the fact that the US and China are heading towards a divorce. This has been true for a long time, long before this. I thought it would be a structured, civilized divorce. It's now absolutely clear that this is an incredibly acrimonious and angry divorce. People in the US are furious with China. I read the Chinese media. People are furious in China with the US. There is a massive amount of anger on both sides. That's not going to go away. And that is going to shape the future of the world. We are now once again in a situation of two great adversary blocks. I've no doubt about this. We're not going to row back on this now.
And we've talked about this so many times. We've talked about this a bipolar world. And I use the Alexander Christopher. Remember, this was all to do with technology transfers. And I said,
we're not bankrolled by China, guys.
No, what I'm
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the live stream.
You're gonna have different OSs. You're gonna have a Chinese-driven platform, and you'll have a Western-driven platform. This is what we're going. We've said this repeatedly. Okay, it's not new here. No. However, I want to put a little nuance in this, okay? Because the yahoos in the media are just buffoons. They've been buffoons with Russiagate, with the impeachment, and with China. Okay, they're all buffoons. That's the only thing. They're all stupid and they're fluent in it. Okay, let me explain why. Okay, I've said repeatedly you need health security, and that includes pharmaceuticals. But whose fault is it that the United States has to import 90%, like 98% of its pharmaceuticals from China? Whose fault is that? Okay, all right, and you're angry with China. Cut off that sector. What are you gonna do? You think you're gonna have that sector reborn in the United States overnight? It could take years. And so we're not taking anything from China. I mean, that's the kind of what the media is saying, and it's foolish. It's buffoonish, okay? That's not a policy. That's a temper tantrum. Okay. Now, I believe in sovereignty. Everybody knows that. Okay, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. But you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And you know what? That's going to be expensive, guys. Okay, because they sent it all over to China for a reason. For their own personal profit and at the expense of American industries at home. They betrayed the American economy, these elites. So all I'm saying is have a coherent policy. China bashing isn't going to do it, okay? It doesn't solve any problem. The problem is that are we going to have a Russia first policy, a China first policy, America first policy, okay? And it doesn't mean that you end up being you create it's artaku. I'm not saying you do that. I say competitive advantage, okay? But because of the way globalization has transformed finance, the whole concept of competitive advantage disappears, okay? And I'm angry about that, okay? Because that makes you weak and helpless. So instead of just bashing China, great, say something about China that's nasty. I hope you feel better. But then the next minute, think about how we need to start restructuring this and moving away from globalization without going in terms of isolation. I'm not an isolationist, okay? But what this knee-jerk reaction, this anger, okay, fine. But we have to move on. And bashing China doesn't move the needle one way or another, okay? And you're going to find out about it because are we going to have a congressional investigation? China's meddling in the American economy. Well, yeah, they meddle all the time. They were invited to. They were allowed in. They were given a red carpet welcome. Who did it? Go to all the major corporations and all the major banks. They did it. They should be put on trial. You want to bash China, bash their co-conspirators in the Western world. Do it, okay? But, fuck China. Wow, I hope you feel better. It doesn't do anything. Real policy, re-examination of globalization. Let's all be mature and grow up for a change instead of just being like children running around screaming and like the American press corps does all the time. I'm sorry for that, but I'm just really tired of this fluff stuff. It doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah. No, and going back to the divorce scenario, like you said, Peter, like you said, Alexander, a divorce is expensive. So this divorce will be expensive.
Yes, but can I just say so also, Peter, sorry, and Alex, I mean, because I've actually handled divorces, they can actually be ultimately a good thing for both parties. If two parties are locked together in an unhappy marriage, and this relationship the United States and China have been in, has become a desperately unhappy marriage, then the quicker that severance happens, the better for each. The Chinese can then stop being this giant export machine, which has its problems. I mean, I've seen it, and they start focusing on improving the lives of their people and all that. And the United States can then set about doing the things Peter was talking about rebuilding its industrial base. So it's surprising to me, actually, how long it has taken for people in the US to see the risks of this over close connection to China. I think bluntly, a lot of it is because so much of the political elite in Washington has been ridiculously focused on Russia and has ignored the fact that China is ultimately a far greater challenger and competitor of the US.
Yes, but
than Russia has ever been.
But Alex, you're right, because look, because of historical reasons in the recent past and then the recent present, if that makes any sense, there is an American presence in the Russian economy, but it's not significant. Okay, and so it's easy to bash Russia because and I've said this for years. It's easy to bash Russia because there's no downside. You could be completely wrong, and people usually are, and there's no downside. China, well, it's a very different story, okay? because they are so invested in that economy. And what really interesting for me,
ask LeBron James.
Ask Hunter Biden, ask him. Okay. But one of the things that's really important to me, and for me, the silver lining in this is that this, again, is another reason to re-examine the entire neoliberal ideological outlook, okay? Because it was neoliberalism that did this, okay? This ideology did this. Oh, we're colorblind, everybody's equal, everyone's the same, every culture is the same, everything is of the same quality, everyone wants to trade, blah, blah, blah. And then you find yourself in this situation, okay? How did your ideology help you out? How did your ideology come along when we needed ventilators and we needed antibiotics? How did your ideology bring that about, okay? I hope there's a real reassessment here. This is a winning moment for me because that is what I've been saying for years. But just criticizing a country doesn't get you anywhere. And just for our viewers to understand, China was negligent. It should have been more forthcoming. It should have been worked with the international community better in the beginning. Yeah, I agree with all of those things. And the first time we ever did a podcast on this, and go back and check. It's going to be China on trial for transparency. If it's not transparent, it's going to be its reputation will be tarnished in the world. Well, I think that I was right because it wasn't transparent. Our line has always been the same. Okay, but I don't viscerally hate any country or any group of people. It doesn't make any sense to me. But what we've gotten ourselves into is American elites have allowed this to happen, okay? And they need to be held accountable, all right? How many companies are being bailed out with trillions of dollars and they're in bed in China? Do you know that? Nobody in the mainstream media is going to tell you that. Maybe the media corporation or newspaper they work for is actually owned indirectly by the Chinese government. Who knows? Okay. What about the lack of transparency from our elites? Okay. This is a can of worms. When you open it up, it's going to be very, very interesting. Let's have a congressional investigation. Okay. Let's go for it.
Can I just finally end with one thing on this, which is that, of course, I had certain dealings with Chinese people and also academics. And I can remember a couple of years ago, the Chinese being incredibly complacent about their relationship with the US and saying, that the Russians have completely messed up. Why are the Russians always getting into these quarrels with the US all the time? And we are so much better and more skilled in the way that we handle the US than the Russians are. Now, of course, they realized that it doesn't actually work like that, and that the Russians and the US, there were problems in that relationship, and now Chinese also have problems with the relationship they had with the US. So they've now learned an awful lot to adversarial relationships, two countries that are opponents geopolitically, economically, not necessarily a bad thing. The world can work quite well with that.
It's the norm. It's the norm.
During the Cold War, can I just say this? For most of the Cold War, it's a fact people don't always understand about the Cold War. Living standards on both sides increased exponentially. The world was actually very stable during the Cold War. Yes, things that each side said horrible and harm things about the other, often with very good cause, by the way, but the relationships were managed very effectively and overall peace was maintained. If the United States and China go different directions, but are able to manage this divorce well, and the competition, the geopolitical competition that will go with it, then, as I said, we could actually see a more stable and better world than the one we have had over the last 30 years, where there's been this impossible, utopian, and ultimately disastrous project to globalize and you make everything uniform. So, let's not despair of this, but, it's not surprising that people are angry. Can I stress they're angry on both sides? And anger will only take you so far. There has to be a proper plan of action. It must mean, if you're American, finally asking hard work questions to people like Apple and all those companies, Tesla, in fact, also, which are opening all those factories in China. And why not bring them back? Why not use the tax system to force them to come back? Chinese
and pay workers good wages, and they'll pay taxes on their good wages.
Which was the American system, by the way.
Right.
The American system was that you had a very, very high wage economy in the United States, within the United States, that operated on complete free market competitive principles. And it created one of the most productive and the most productive and wealthy economies in the world. But if you're talking back to the world as it was back, say, in the 60s and before, the US did not have, at that time, a project for worldwide globalization. In conditions of the Cold War, that was impossible.
All right. What do you guys say? We get some super chats?
Absolutely. Let's move on.
Great discussion, guys. China is...
It
brings up a lot of different views.
People are
good.
very
It's good. It's good discussion.
People are very angry, and with cause.
No, it's interesting to follow. It's interesting to follow how all of this is unfolding.
And can I
let me just say this, being angry isn't a foreign policy. Okay.
No. Well, what do they always say? Don't get angry, get even. This is one of the things you should always remember. Anger is a very bad counselor. I've also heard, and I've said this so many times to people I've been advising, anger is a very bad counselor. Decisions made in anger are repented at leisure. Go away, think hard, do what you must do, take every step one at a time. And as I said, oddly enough, you'll find yourself in a much better position that way. Carry on.
Let's get to the super chats. From Sparky, $5 super chat. Chloroquine and azithromycin used in tandem to treat CV should be branded Trump's cure to make globalists and SJWs heads explode.
Well, indeed. I should say something. I understand that some of the hopes, and I'm not saying that Sparky's recommending them. I mean, he's making a very, very witty and good point there. But just to say, I understand that those two drugs are not effective in dealing with CV. That now seems...
There's different opinions on that.
There's different opinions. I've heard the chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine in conjunction with zinc.
I'm really glad this was brought up, and I'm not going to have a witty reaction to it. But it does bother me that bringing up these drugs here. Have you noticed how it's been brought up in terms of politics? Call it the Trump cure or something. See, everything is distorted. It kind of reminds me of the Dark Side of the Moon, the cover of the Pink Floyd's album. They have the pyramid and the light going through it. Yeah, breaks it. And so you have one thing going in, something very different coming out. And what the pyramid is, the prism is politics, okay? And so it's the Chinese coronavirus, and you have the Trump cure. So you're politicizing it, which again, you can make light of it on Twitter, and you'll get, some people, you get all the hotheads, but, I really want to depoliticize it because I really want us to get through it, because I'm so terrified of the tens of millions of working people in the Western world that are going to find themselves in a deep pit. Whatever you call the virus or whatever you call the cure, it's not going to help those people. We need to keep our focus in the right direction. My 2 cents.
All right, from Molly Noonan, $2 super chat. Thank you very much, Molly, for that super chat. From Fat Boy, £2 super chat. What are you guys doing to stay sane in the lockdown?
We're doing it now.
I mean, I read, I walk my dogs, I listen to lots and lots of classical music. I'm very much a classical music buff. And in the evenings with Catherine, we sit down and we watch films, and we've been watching lots of films. So as I said, lots of things to do. But I have to say that actually following the news has been extremely depressing.
Yes.
And I'm also in touch with friends who work on some of them in the health systems, also members of my, friends who've been ill.
How are they doing?
Well, one of them is in a very bad way. I talked about it And I understand. I learned today that he also has kidney issues. So he's an old man. So as I said, it's difficult. But the other three, I've got 4 people who I know. The other 3 seem to be doing better.
Okay.
And one of them, by the way, is a young woman, very fit, healthy young woman.
Yeah, she's doing better?
She's doing better. But she described it to me. I had a discussion with her this morning. And I want to say this because I know there's some people who are, still skeptical about what this thing is. She said she had been incredibly short of breath for 4 days. And she's done marathons. And she said it was like being out of breath after you've done a marathon, but being like that for 4 days. So just think of what that means. It is awful, apparently. And there was some possibility of her being put on a ventilator. Fortunately, that's not happened. You do not want to be on a ventilator for very long. It can do havoc to your lungs. And the inflammation in your lungs can be extremely bad. So even though the death rate is relatively low, especially for younger and fitter people from this disease, it can still leave you with long-term health conditions if you come through it, and especially if you've had to be on a ventilator for a long time. So please don't catch it. Please stay safe and take all the wise precautions. Wash your hands often. I do all the time. And people have no doubt noticed that I'm one of those people who rubs his face lots. So I'm washing my hands almost every 10 minutes when I'm not doing programs. So that gives you an idea.
My average day is this: I get up around 6 o'clock in the morning because of the dogs, and it's early because, as I've said many times, I'm in a new apartment complex, so there are not very many people here. So I can walk with the dogs without the leash in the morning because there's hardly anybody around. Yeah. When there are people around, I have dachshunds, they're hard to control. Then what I do is I take a shower, get myself dressed, I make myself a breakfast, I watch Tucker Carlson. That's the first thing I do. I check my email, I watch Tucker, and then I go to Zero Hedge, because you have to remember, I'm looking at yesterday's news that's still today's news in the US. So I'm looking at the American Conservative, antiwar.com, Moon of Alabama, and all the links that they'll take me from outside of those core areas. And then I take the boys for a walk again. I sit down for a couple of hours and read a book, because Alexander Makiris is absolutely right. It's very depressing, all of this. And so I'm reading a book on Paul Johnson's The Renaissance. It's a very thin volume. It's really good. It's gymnastics for my brain. I need to start thinking about these things because I'm so depressed by everything. And then I'll call for takeout. It's brought to my door. I'm afraid my waistline is being enhanced during all of this because I'm not getting enough exercise. And I can't go buy steaks in a big supermarket. There are no steaks where I am. Then I take a nap, then I read some more, and then I watch Sagar and Crystal at Rising, because they're in the morning, it's my late afternoon. And then I make sure there's a few cold beers in the refrigerator, and then I watch Netflix. That's my day.
Yes, I also walk my dogs, and you can see Mishkin here. He's telling me how he's of course completely oblivious to all that's going on, and he's having a wonderful time because he's got both me and Catherine, my wife, with me at all times now. We have 2 dogs who Peter got to know in London, and I have to say they're also been a tremendous comfort through this difficult time. Isn't that right?
Cool. Well, let us know, guys, in the live stream and in the comments down below what you do during this lockdown, and any tips and advice as to how you're passing your time.
I can't underestimate how important it is for me to have my dogs during all of this. I'm serious. I mean, there's a huge psychological mutual dependence. They know there's something wrong. I just know it. I just know that they feel something's not right. And they get more walks out of it. They're happy about that. They're happy. And the interesting thing for me too is that I always think about community and what it means to be home and to have a home and to feel at home. And this is a new apartment for me. And actually, I'm not verbally, but through smiles and gestures and hand waves. I'm learning to meet the dog owners of my complex, which there are many. And that is the first building of my immediate civil society is other pet owners. And we have a kindred spirit for each other. I just feel it all over the time. So that's an upside too. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't tend to, because I'm not really I don't verbally exchange anything with these people. So they are the Cocker Spaniel woman or the German Shepherd guy, okay? You do it through their pets. You don't do it through them.
Okay? It's exactly the same with us. It's exactly the same with us. We know the dogs better than the people, in truth.
From Finn Freak in the live stream, is he washing his paws often?
Oh yes, absolutely. Interesting thing about golden retrievers is they actually groom quite a lot. They self-groom.
Yeah, I noticed that.
That's not something that people realise, but they actually keep themselves quite clean when they're not going out and rolling in the mud, which they also do, and that can be quite irritating. But still.
All right. Thank you for that question, Fat Boy. Let's see from Nigel. How you doing, Nigel? 999. Jack Ma, Chinese owner of Alibaba, donated 2 million masks, 400,000 test kits, 104 ventilators to Cuba. Then shipping co threatened with severe U.S. sanctions.
Yep, I know that.
Permanently canceled the shipment. When will it ever end? Question mark.
Well, indeed. I mean, I have to say, this is one of the things I do want to say, which is that these sanctions on Cuba, which have gone on forever and ever and ever, are completely self-defeating. I mean, they have not resulted in the change in the government of Cuba, which, by the way, the United States shouldn't be involved in or concerned about anyway. Each country should be left to find its own way by itself. But quite apart from anything else, they're completely self-defeating. They have merely entrenched the situation in Cuba. They have not helped in any way. And to stop Cuba taking steps to improve the condition of its people, the health of its people at a time of crisis like this seems to me wholly wrong.
It's the small-minded spitefulness of these elites. I mean, it's just so pathetic.
Absolutely.
So, did you guys hear that story? That billionaire, trillionaire guy that he got his own private drone and had the drones film him on his yacht in the Caribbean, and he put it out on Twitter. And of course, he got a lot of pushback. But again, it's these kind of people that have no self-awareness, and the Washington consensus has no self-awareness. What they're doing is they're ratcheting up more sanctions against Iran, saber rattling in Iraq,
Venezuela,
putting a bounty on Maduro's head. And just pettiness. Oh, and Guaido, why don't you step down? But we still support you. I mean, this is nonsense. I mean, this is it defies any common sense. All right, and when you see this Abrams come out there and spouting his policy for Latin America, it should make your stomach cringe. I mean, here was a guy that was backing death squads in the 1980s, and he's back. It just, you just throw your arms up in disgust.
And Assange is still in prison.
Assange is indeed still in prison.
Doesn't make any sense.
No,
guys, I don't understand the 5G thing. I'm looking at the live stream, honestly. The 5G connected to this. Cyprus doesn't have any 5G. Iran doesn't have any 5G. And we've got CV cases. So I don't understand this whole, it's 5G. I don't get it. So I'm open if anyone wants to explain it in the comments down below, please. But
please.
Right now,
I've seen this too, and I don't understand it.
I don't understand. I don't understand it because we have a 0. We barely have 4G here. We barely have 4G. So anyway, let's get moving on. From Michael Ende, 20 SEK super chat. Thank you very much. Michael from Canadian Dan, $5 super chat. History will prove the monumental failure of Western governments to act. Will there ever be accountability? Question mark, and can there be?
Well, good question. Well, not in the present systems.
That's what the whole purpose of these podcasts and Crosstalk. That's the whole purpose of Crosstalk and these podcasts. They be held accountable.
And if I can just take just a step back, the whole nature of the EU structure is that it makes accountability impossible, because, you know, if Ursula messes up, or Christine Lagarde messes up,
they've been mess ups for their whole career. Alexander, Christine Lagarde, and Ursula von der Leyen. And look where they got promoted.
They get promoted. That's the point I was going to make.
Lagarde is a complete mess up throughout her whole career.
Absolutely.
She's actually a criminal, is she not?
Absolutely, she was involved in financial corruption. I mean, there you
go.
So you make it
financial corruption, and she's in charge of the ECB.
Well, indeed, and before that, she was in charge of the IMF. I mean, it's just, and she lost money. She's lost billions on. Was it 55 billions on Argentina?
No, they won't be held accountable.
Billions on.
No one will ever be held accountable.
Right? The whole EU system is about non-accountability. It's about putting people in positions where they can't be held accountable. That's what it does. Right. That's why there's a committee to keeping it going.
From Brent Clune, a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Brent from Valley S. Thank you, Valley S, for the $20 super chat. Always appreciate it, Valley S. And from Miss Texas G, a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Miss Texas G. From Christopher Doby, $2 super chat. Geez, this virus has cooked so many things. Yeah, I agree. This virus has really thrown everything upside down.
It's a searchlight that has on all the flaws that have existed everywhere in the West, in China too. To come back to China, I mean, Peter was absolutely right. The commentators will say, you Alex, that the Chinese concealed it, messed up terribly in the first 2 months. That's been exposed. It's exposed so many ugly things in so many bad places.
John Maynard Keynes famously observed that when you have a crisis, an existential crisis, it shows the criminality, the shams, and the lack of thoughtfulness that seemingly seems to work with great ease. Now, I mean, that was his commentary about the advent of the Great Depression. You know, the crisis actually showed the flaws, and we're in the same boat right now.
All right. From Sparky, $5 super chat. An engineer, scientist, mechanic, veteran, farmer, hunter, and fisherman. I'm the Omega Man in the upcoming post-apocalyptic world. Maniacal laughter. All right, Sparky.
Actually, I'm going to watch Mad Max tonight.
there you go.
Can I just say that? But there's a very
Mel Gibson Mad Max.
There's a very, very serious point here. I mean, we need a world with technicians and engineers and that kind of that. One of the fundamental problems is that we have discounted the value of people like that, so that the kind of people who have been doing incredibly well recently are people who are, you know, very good at financial engineering rather than actual engineering. And hopefully one hopes that balance will start to shift. And I mean, you know, Peter,
if you bring the jobs back, that's exactly what's going to happen. Absolutely. I remember seeing a meme. It was, you know, it really struck a chord with me. It was two guys. One guy is wearing a hard hat, and he's up on a pole, and he's, you know, connecting the wires and all of that, you know, and he's obviously a worker working with his hands. And on the bottom it says makes $175,000 a year, is married, has 2 kids, a mortgage, and he owns his own car. And then the second one is a barista kid that did his, you know, he did his feminist studies on Mongolian dance of the 17th century. You know, and he's working in Starbucks. He makes $8 an hour. He's $150 in debt, and he lives in his mother's basement. Okay, because the guy that knows what he wants to do, he wants to have a family. He wants to be able to support his family, and he wants to be independent and not dependent on the government. He's the guy that's connecting the lines on the pole. And when the wires break, who's out on the pole? It's those guys. Okay. You know, but he works with his hands. He has gloves on, okay? Our society has demeaned that kind of work so much and propped up these snowflakes that are all they do is whine and bitch at a Starbucks, okay? That is 2020 Western world.
And also the financial people, the people who work in finance, of whom I know many.
You don't have to be smart to work in finance. You know,
you don't. But no. You get disproportionately over-rewarded. And that's
Right.
one of the major problems. So, you know, if we have a system where people like engineers and technicians and agronomists and people like that, and you know, farmers, you know, start to get rewarded more properly.
And YouTube channels.
YouTube, well, and then, well, maybe, but you know, but
we're creators of content.
But information is a product, perhaps one of the most important products. But what I'm saying is financial engineering, a lot of it is just dealing with mathematical abstractions. And I say that I know a lot of people in the financial world think exactly as I do. One of the major abuses of mathematical knowledge has been the way in which all of these people, all these mathematicians, fine mathematicians, who ought to be out there designing products, designing software, designing all kinds of things, are instead designing products, as they're called, in the financial markets, which have actually no intrinsic value at all. They're just constructs, ultimately, of the imagination.
And they worship a god,
No.
a four-letter word, and it's debt. They worship debt.
Ultimately, that's what they create. Because that's ultimately what all of this is.
All right, 943 likes I saw in the live stream. Let's get that to 1,000, guys. Hit that like. Let's get it to 1,000. Come on. From Lisa Shackleton, a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Lisa, to the Duran community. From Sparky, $2 super chat. EU was on its way out, but war on terror saved it.
Well, yes, to a certain extent. It's a very, very insightful assessment. Yes, I would agree, actually.
From LeChat, €5 super chat. I'm sure you all know the work of Dr. Robert O. Young. He says that CV is not a virus. I'd like your opinion on that. Thank you. Thank you, LeChat, for that super chat.
I am not an epidemiologist. I am not a scientist. I am not a doctor. All I will say is this: there is a health crisis. Of that, I have no doubt. As I said, I know 4 people who have been very seriously ill from this. And I'm also in touch with lots of people in the health system, in the British health system, not so much in the Greek health system, but certainly in the British health system. And these people have been in very, very great difficulties over the last couple of weeks, struggling to contain the problem that is, as far as I can tell, still very much out of control, at least in Britain. I just saw a report, by the way, that we're now being told to expect 1,000 deaths a day around the Easter holiday in Britain. So that's a serious crisis by any measure. It's not Spanish flu. It's not the bubonic plague. It's not smallpox, the smallpox crises, or even Ebola. But that doesn't mean you don't take it seriously.
Yeah, I agree. Mites 54 is a new member of the Duran community. Welcome, Mites 54 from BA, $2 super chat. In Australia so far, 2 million job losses. That's a lot.
In Australia?
Australia, that's huge.
Well, it's huge. Absolutely huge.
Thank you very much, BA, for that information. From ZR is a new member to the Duran community. Thank you, ZR, for joining the Duran community. From Sparky, $2 super chat. Power more from torque rather than RPM.
Yeah.
Alexander, very true.
That's so absolutely what I'm saying. I mean, that's what the US also needs to do. And can I just say, it has that potential more than any other US economy, any other Western economy. That's why I'm ultimately an optimist about the US, in spite of all these horrors and dysfunctions and the baroque political system, and Schiff and Pelosi, who are again apparently looking for some way to use the Corona crisis to restart.
Go away, go away, Schiff. Go away, Schiff. Go away, Pelosi. Go away, Schumer.
I know. But ultimately, the US has the resources to pull through, and the strong political system to pull through. That is what I believe. And and it has done in the past, and it will come through again. And the US needs to concentrate more on talk. That's where it needs to really look at its problem, and it can do it. It can be like it was in the 1940s, where it could just effortlessly produce all the machines and weapons and whatever it needed to win the Second World War, and its economy grew. And
well,
people,
we didn't have a politics of a division then. I mean, I wish I could be more optimistic, and maybe I will be a little bit more optimistic. But we have to wait a few more months because with this spike in unemployment, you know, the thing is that the corporate media is owned by corporations, okay? And they're going to push for whatever agenda they want, and it'll be a political agenda. And they have traditionally forgotten about middle America. And I mean middle in every way, middle income and geographically middle. Up until the time they start taking interest in middle in both sense of the word, you know, we could have this a disaster unfold, and it's not going to be as acute as the way it's reported. It'll be only acute if it serves as a political cudgel for them, and that's really, really pathetic. And I can tell you, coming from the middle class, coming from the middle of the country, what the elites are doing now is unforgivable. And that will be translated into politics as well. Bernie failed them as a leader, but their movement is still there, all right? And they're angry right now. And they're being pushed aside, they're being underappreciated, and they're being blamed for everything from, you know, having Trump being elected to leaving the country with that pathetic man where death is knocking at the door, Joe Biden. This is a mess, you guys. And as the economy disintegrates for so many people, there will be consequences. So I'm not as optimistic.
Okay, from Sparky, $2 super chat. Good time for old pastimes, music, fishing, etc.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, music, absolutely. I mean, as I said, I couldn't live without music. I mean, I'm very, very, very much a person who listens to music, and classical music is an indispensable. What's called
fishing depends where you live.
Well, I was thinking up until this, you know, last few weeks, I was getting by a turntable, and I already checked in. There's a number of places in Moscow where you can buy vinyl markets, you know. Of course, everything is closed. That was going to be my new pet project, and maybe it still will be when we get through this.
Absolutely. Good project to have. From Raccoon, £5 super chat. Love the show, lads. Shame I never get a shout from the haters of truth. Thank you very much for that super chat, Raccoon. We appreciate it. From Ken Barnhouse, keep up the good work and analysis. $5 super chat. Thank you very much, Ken, for that super chat. From Sparky, France was terrified when Germany reunified, so accepted the EU out of fear. They told me they were afraid the Germans would march into France again.
Well, I think it was Margaret Thatcher that was more worried.
Mitterrand also. Mitterrand and Thatcher were both horrified when German reunification happened. And they got together, apparently, and Margaret Thatcher sent this message to Gorbachev and said, you know, if you can prevent it happening, we will provide you with diplomatic support. And Gorbachev, for once, did the entirely right thing and said, no, sorry, we can't stop it. It would be impossible for us to even think about doing so, and we want good relations with Germany. But Thatcher took that line. Mitterrand then pressed ahead very aggressively with the European, with economic and monetary union. His idea was to lock in Germany by constructing the euro, and then Kohl took up that idea, and it ended the other way around. So France got locked in instead of Germany.
So let's see if we can update that. So that NATO was to keep the Americans in, the Germans down, and the Russians out. So how do we recast those things? So it was to keep, essentially keep the Germans still down, keep the Russians out, but the Americans would never leave. Okay, I blew it. Right. Let me think about it.
You've got, well, you're locked down, Peter, so you've got time to think about it. That's your new project. All right, from Maria Mayer, a $10 super chat. The EU needs to execute a stimulus plan, just like the US has done. The US is taking massive action, and it includes small business, and money is available. What has the EU done? Question mark.
Right.
Can I just real quick here? But just think about the very premise of the question. And the premise of the question is going to answer what the real problem is that we've built an entire culture, economy, and even a politics around debt. And this is what really terrifies me. I agree, small and medium-sized businesses, if there is a way, a mechanism to help them. A month ago, if someone would tell me, one day, Peter, you'll agree to direct payments to families and workers in the United States during an economic crisis, I would have been horrified. I'm actually very much for it right now, okay? But, you know, what we have to worry about, are we just perpetuating a system that has already failed? And I think we have maybe one of the most important things we need to think about as we get out of this crisis is how debt plays a role in our life. Okay, I think that's very important. So go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
No, what I was going to say is what the EU needs to do is to start putting together a plan for ending the euro. That is its immediate priority. That is the way to reflate economies. It needs to put a plan together to reflate the euro, to wipe out, in other words, to cancel all the debts that are owed via the defaults to the European Stability Mechanism Fund, and to allow countries to start setting their own budgets and interest rate policies in ways that reflect the needs of their own economies. That's what it needs to do. Now, it can maintain an overriding superstructure that enables countries to trade with each other and to coordinate economic policies together, which is what the old European community used to do.
Yes.
But the best thing that it can do in this kind of situation is understand that this present structure that it has now is not helping countries deal with this problem. It is pulling them collectively down. That's what it needs to do. If it moves forward and, as I said, unravels this nightmarish and overcomplicated system that it has created, that will be far more useful and helpful than an across-the-board stimulus, most of which will simply vanish into more debt repayments, which will then generate more debt around down the line. So that's my little that's my little.
But see, this is what's happening with these cash injections to individuals and families in the U.S. I don't know why they think this is going to act as a real stimulus, because people are going to be paying off their debts.
Yeah.
Okay, and a moratorium on paying back student loans, a moratorium on paying your mortgage. And this is not a forgiveness. It's just that you're going to pay everything, every nickel and penny. We're going to give you a holiday of a month or 2 months or 3 months. See, it doesn't change. Okay, as a matter of fact, it's just going to make debt repayment even more difficult, because you're going to be behind with the prospect of not having a job. All right, that's why I keep worrying about what's going to happen in the next few months. You know, we'll get through this pandemic. We will get through it.
Yeah.
But what it leaves in behind, what it's going to leave them behind, is horrifying to even contemplate right now.
From Sparky, $5 super chat. French asked me if the U.S. would back them if Germany marched in. When I assured them that the U.S. remembered Lafayette, they were visibly relieved.
Oh, come on! Nobody thought that Germany was going to invade France when the reunification happened. I mean, come on, you guys. Nobody.
Peter, I was in Britain at the time, and I can remember there was a very, very tense atmosphere. Nobody quite knew what.
Are you serious? Germany was going to.
I am absolutely serious.
Are you serious?
If you're talking about the mood in the British government, I mean, bear in mind, people like Margaret Thatcher had lived through the war.
Look, I think
about it.
The concern was not that German troops were going to go anywhere. That's ridiculous. The problem, the perception was, and something I can perfectly well understand, knowing the history, is that you would have a hegemonic Germany in Europe. Now, that's something that Mitterrand and Thatcher thought about. They didn't deem Germany as a military threat. That's just naivety. But the fact that you had, for a communist country of its size and population, the DDR was a bit of a powerhouse, okay, when you think about it. I mean, no real natural resources. I mean, their most important resource were their people, not their ideology, it was their people. And then having that added on to West Germany, well, then you would have a hegemonic Germany in Europe. And you know what? You almost do. So I can understand that. But anyone saying troops marching is just being silly.
Peter, can I just say something? I remember, I know Germany well. I mean, I knew at the time that there was no danger of that happening. But there is the reality of danger, and there is the sort of perception of it. There was this frisson in the autumn of 1989. There was a frisson right across Britain, in London and Paris, where people were extremely nervous about what a united Germany would be all about. And fears of a revival of Germany as a military power were very real at that time, and of the breakup of NATO and all of that. Now, as I said, that might have been naive. In fact, that was completely naive. That was entirely wrong, true, but people did fear it. I can remember hearing, you know, I had more political contacts then than I do today. I can remember people talking in London in most bizarre ways. I thought they were bizarre, but to say that people didn't think that, they did think it. And as I said, they thought it to the point where they actually were talking about finding ways of stopping German reunification.
So then they didn't understand 45 years of
no, they didn't. They didn't. They
at
didn't.
all.
They didn't. I mean, you're talking about political classes in Britain and France where very few people speak German. I mean, remember that. And it's so very different from their attitudes to Russia today. We both know that there is no possibility of a Russian invasion of any European country at the present time. And yet, people still talk about it as if it's possible. And in 1989, people did still think in that way. I mean, it sounds bizarre today, but and to me, it's because I knew Germany, it was bizarre then. That doesn't mean that there weren't some people who still actually thought like that. Okay. There was also, can I also say, this is another extraordinary thing. There was also a lot of people who were worried that a reunited Germany would align with Russia. This is a widespread fear, and that fear still exists, and it still explains.
The quintessential.
I know, but you know,
the quintessential European was a German. Okay.
I know, but in 1989, people did think that, and,
well, I was in communist Poland. Okay, I guess I was out of the loop.
I know. London and Paris, different places.
Let's get to the super chats, guys. From Sparky, thinning the herd doesn't ever seem to hurt China. $2 super chat.
Well, true.
From Paul Cardi.
I mean, can I just say, again, about talking about China, I mean, the other thing to say about this is that if people wanted to say that China is a ruthless dictatorship, it is. I'm not disputing that at all. And that it can sometimes take some...
But at the same time, okay, pour cold water on all of this. You know, they brought hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry for the inconvenient facts.
No, I've
been to China. I have been to China. There's a huge middle class, okay? Now, does that take away from the fact that it's a dictatorship? No, it doesn't. No. Okay, I'm not denying that. No. Okay,
it's also.
What I'm saying is we don't need a caricature. Okay, no. We don't need that. We need to understand who they are, what they are, and what we used to be.
Yes, it's a very effective and successful
command economy.
Command economy, exactly.
From Paul Carden, £5 super chat. Thanks, guys, for your great words. Links to my YouTube transcription site. Can you confirm your ebook sales have been good? From Paul. Yes, our ebook sales have been good, Paul. Thank you very much. Of course, you can also use Paul's services for audio and video transcription. We highly recommend them. And we will have, and we will have a couple of more ebooks.
Placement.
And we'll put together a couple more ebooks as well. So look for that in the future. Thank you, Paul, for your super chat. From Sparky, economic restart gets the orchestra back in sync.
Yes, it can do. I mean, a big economic cataclysm can be a good way of sorting out all the accumulated problems and starting again from a much stronger position. After all, that was what happened in the Western economies after the Second World War. You had all the accumulated problems which had led to the Depression, and then to the Second World War, and the slate was wiped clean, and people were able to forge ahead. I am old enough to remember those times. You know, I was born in the 60s, in 61, and I can remember what it was like living still as a child, living through that time.
Yeah, well, Napoleon burned Moscow to the ground. And you know what? In retrospect, that was a good idea because it was a pretty shitty place, okay? And they totally rebuilt the city, okay? And that city is what we have today, okay? But I'm just saying that you can look for a silver lining after a crisis if you learn the right lessons.
Absolutely.
Just pointed out.
Absolutely.
From Sparky, a $2 super chat. Rhinos and tigers could benefit if China changes.
Well, yes. I mean, can I just say something? And Peter and I can both experience this. I mean, people who talk about Chinese wet markets and Chinese attitudes to animal products are absolutely right, at least from my perspective, from my cultural perspective. The things I was in Shanghai, and I went to places which were not wet markets, to food places, and I was upset by some of the things I saw there. And I am not a vegetarian. I eat meat, and I eat fish, and I do all of those things. But it still distressed me, some of the things I saw.
Yes,
and
a good friend of mine pointed out, who spent many years in China. She said, they will eat anything.
Yeah.
All right, from Harry C. Smith, Kim Iverson just interviewed a Canadian guy who's lived in China for 10 plus years. He explains what's actually happening there. I highly recommend it. Harry, just put that link in the live stream, actually better in the comments, and we'll flag that link. Interested to see it. From Sparky, $2 super chat. China funded Clinton 96 campaign for secret.
Absolutely true. And why was that not made a big issue then? And there's been so much nonsense said about a Russian campaign to support Donald Trump, which never existed. I mean, there is this massive disproportion. And, the point about dictatorship, I mean, one of the great weird things is that, of course, the Russian political system is immeasurably more democratic and open than the Chinese one is. And yet, for so long, people who claim to care about these things were in the United States and in Britain. I mean, the Cameron government was very, very close to China. They were completely uninterested in, all these questions when they related to China. It was Russia they always had this axe to grind against. So,
do you have any idea how many times in the 15 years I've worked at RT, people ask me, so that means you believe in communism? It's just baffling to me. It's just simply baffling to me.
No.
Of course not. I don't.
No.
I mean, we've actually had guests on Crosstalk that would say, well, the Politburo, I mean, the Russian government, I mean, it's part of their DNA. I mean, it's something that Russophobia is so much part and parcel of the Western identity that people aren't even aware of it.
Okay, from Harry C. Smith, Australian government announced all childcare free from today.
Well, good for them.
Thank you very much, Harry, for that information and that super chat. From the chat, €5 super chat. Many Americans are propagating don't buy from China. The same people are constantly buying on Amazon, which is stuffed with Chinese goods.
Well, indeed. I mean, can I just say, does that extend to face masks? Most of which, I believe 95% of face masks are actually made in China. iPhones, exactly.
Android phones,
well,
all the parts in there.
Go much further than that, guys. Well, how much do you think of the material that the Pentagon buys every single year, and how much they have, so much of this material they have to buy from Chinese manufacturers? It's terrifying to learn about. And again, instead of bashing China, which you fine if it makes you feel good, but look at these companies. They get preferential bidding for Pentagon projects, and they've outsourced all of their material and equipment to China. And this is for the American military, okay? I mean, who's going to be held account for this? Again, Bash China all you want, but that's not going to make any difference. Go after the people that got in bed with them and made a lot of money with them and destroyed the American middle class. Get angry with them like I'm angry.
From Phoenix FP40, £5 super chat. Why do some people have to play the blame game? Why?
Yeah.
Why is it a serious question? It's a serious
Well,
question.
it's a very,
Why do they play the blame game?
You don't have to be introspective. Okay, that's it. Go ahead, Alex. Again,
the blame game is completely it's completely not helpful at this time. This is my own personal view. You should focus all your attention on dealing with this health crisis. But why do people indulge in the blame game? Because they're angry, and they're angry, as I said, for two reasons. One is a valid one, because, as I said, China didn't handle the situation. It was secretive. It did try to conceal what was going on at the beginning, but they're also angry because of the sense that it ultimately ended up handling the situation more effectively than the Western countries have. So you have these two things. Both cause anger for different reasons. One is legitimate, one is not. Both perhaps make people feel better. Neither is a policy. Ultimately, anger is never a policy. If you want a divorce from China, which, by the way, I tend to think at this time is something the US perhaps needs to do, then organize yourself properly. The US has all the means and resources to do that. I never thought in my lifetime, I mean, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, that there would be material shortages in the United States, I would not have believed it.
Right.
The United States is the country which ought to be able to flood the world with these things, not have to run around all over the world trying to buy masks and things like that.
Play the blame game. Say that 5 times very fast.
Yeah.
Right, thank you for that super chat. From Paul Armdromeda, $50 Australian dollar super chat. Thank you very much, Paul, for that generous super chat. We really appreciate it. NPR, Italy general practitioners, quote, they remember having seen very strange pneumonia, very severe in December and even November. This means that the virus was circulating at least in Lombardy and before outbreak occurring in China.
I've seen that, and it might be true. I mean, I am not an epidemiologist. I am not a biologist. I am not going to try and say where this thing originated from. Most consensus is that it was China, that it was Hubei and Wuhan province. But I've seen other people say that it might have been Lombardy, and that may explain why the situation in Lombardy is so bad, and that there may have been cases even going back to September, October. How can I say whether that's right or wrong? This isn't my area of expertise. I am not going to try and guess. But whatever it was, whoever was responsible, it doesn't change the fact that there was a serious crisis in China in November and December and early January, and the Chinese were not open about it. I mean, even if it originated in Italy and was brought from Italy to China, that still doesn't excuse what the Chinese authorities were doing in November and December and January.
Okay, thank you very much for that super chat. We really appreciate it.
So much for an hour and a half.
Yeah, we're wrapping it up. From Isaac V, $2 super chat. Please buy a nice can of food for your cute dog.
I have bought sacks of foods
for both of your dogs.
Bin, huge. I saw you shoveling it.
Shovel it in, you have to. But my dogs are very well provided for. I took every precaution.
From Samuel Stafford, who is now a Duran member. Thank you very much, Samuel Stafford, for joining. From Sparky, you guys think you have a tough turn during the pandemic. I'm stuck social distancing by bass fishing on my boat in the middle of my massive remote lake. That is an awesome way to spend your time, Sparky.
Absolutely.
Awesome way. I love fishing.
Absolutely.
All right. From Phoenix FP40, £2 super chat. Peter, what's the time?
Right now, it is, I'm going to use the time that I'm used to, 17 hours, 19 minutes. 5
And I think it's always in reference to your, because I think you can still see your watches winding in this view. In the Zoom view, you can see
a lot of watches.
All right. Thank you for that super chat. And we have $100 super chat from Samuel Stafford. Wow. Thank you for that.
That's very generous. Thank
Very
you
generous.
very much. Yeah.
God bless you all. Keep up the good fight. Thank
Yeah.
you very much, Samuel, for that super chat.
Mm.
From Jan Schofield, who's a new member of the Duran community. Welcome, Jan, to the Duran community. From Sparky, $5 super chat. If Hillary was president, I'd be having brunch now. That's bad because I'd rather be fishing. All right.
I'm really glad people caught when I caught that onto that one about what a week and a half ago or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, from Alan Wren.
And the guy, everything's fine. We're drinking wine in the shower.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Sparky, for that super chat. From Alan Wren, just received my Duran mug. Brilliant. Yes, the Duran mugs are brilliant. DuranShop.com. Check them out. From Nigel, $4.99 super chat. My mom and dad breed golden retrievers for show and gun. Best of breed at Crufts International Dog Show, 1958. Keep well, stay safe. We love you guys.
Well, thank you for maintaining the quality of this breed. I mean, they're my first dogs, by the way. I never used to have dogs. My wife was very keen on having dogs, and I absolutely adore the two dogs we have, and I recommend golden retrievers to anybody who has the space for them, because they're a big, high energy dog, but I adore them both.
From Kathleen Cohen, $2 super chat, just kicking in some dues. Thank you very much, Kathleen, for that super chat. From Dennis Klein, $4.99 super chat. Thoughts on CV created at Fort Detrick, sent to UNC lab and transferred to Wuhan for deployment at Military World Games.
Well, this is a story. I've heard that. Again, I don't know. I mean, I have to say this, and I'm going to say this. I mean, every scientist that I've spoken or heard from about this seems quite certain that this is a natural microbe that evolved in nature, that it's not artificially created. And I'm going to go along with that. I am not a scientist, and I find it very difficult to believe that anybody would launch a thing like this as a weapon. I mean, a weapon that is indiscriminate, that targets older people and leaves young people of military age relatively unaffected, doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense to me. But, you know, what do I know about these things? Virtually nothing. All I will say is scientists I respect seem to think this is natural.
Okay, from Paul Lee, this is to help relieve my guilt. Love watching your show. Thank you for that super chat, Paul Lee. From Sparky, dust off your pianos, guitars, violins, etc.
I wish I could. I'm afraid I love music, but I am absolutely hopeless at playing any musical instrument. I've tried several times and it just doesn't work. So I say to myself, maybe I'm privileged, because that way I can just sit back and listen to music rather than feel that I have to perform it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I couldn't carry a tune in a suitcase. So I appreciate music.
Yeah.
Thank you for that super chat. Once again, Sparky from Kathleen Cohn. What happens to the USA financially plays out on the rest of the world. Eek.
Yes, true, completely so. I mean, perhaps less so than in 2008, though we don't know for sure yet. But still, the US is the heart of the world financial system. I mean,
right,
if that financial system has a heart attack, everyone is affected.
All right, moving along from Le Chat to Euro Super Chat. Zapfenstrike, Peter.
One more time.
Zapfenstrike.
I don't know what that means.
I'm not getting that super chat either. But if you want to explain it in the live stream, Le Chat, that will help me out a lot. From Sparky, $10 super chat. I was serious. I was in Nice and was traveling with 2 German supermodels at the time, as was my custom. American and French used the phrase, if the Germans march in tomorrow, will America, ?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm very impressed that you're the sort of person who is able to have 2 supermodels.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Sparky, for that super chat. From Rahul Pinto, $5 super chat. Do you think civil war will break out in the EU?
Well, I hope not, and I don't think so. In fact, I'm reasonably sure that it won't, but civil unrest, rioting and that kind of thing, very,
already
very
starting
possibly,
in Italy.
is already starting in Italy. Yeah.
The thing is that really, part of the political equation, the calculus that has been absent for very long. I mean, will there be a civil war in the EU? I suppose I would interpret that as country to country. Of course not. But class, yes. Internal civil war, internal civil strife, yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's already been on the cards. Okay, we've already seen that. I mean, again, this sense of foreboding I have, it really gives me a great sense of depression, because we're looking at the fatalities, we're looking at where they are, the pounding down the curve, all of these things that, we are in the news here. But, I know all of that's going to be taken care of. It's, I have to sit in my apartment for another month, okay? And thank God I have some company. But, the outcome of this is, no one knows. It's so hard to fathom the damage that's going to be left in the wake of this crisis, okay? We're going to get through this crisis, folks, okay?
Oh,
where it came from is not really a major concern of mine at all. How we deal with it now is the concern that I have. And I think that's a concern we should all have.
Yeah. All right, let's get through the final few super chats from A. Sanchez, joined as a new member to the Duran community. Thank you for joining, A. Sanchez. And a super chat from A. Sanchez, $20. How much of a major impact will this situation have on the balance, the real world economy versus the digital economies globally?
It's a really good question.
It's a very, very good question. I mean, I'm going to say one thing. I think that one thing that's going to happen is that we're going to get an awful lot more people from now on working from home, because it's been shown that they can do. So a very good friend of mine, for example, is a senior official in the British tax service, and she manages people, and she's found that she can do so quite effectively digitally. And my wife is the head of the English department in a British university, and she's found that she can do an awful lot of the sort of things she used to do at her college, that she could actually do them, online, and actually teach online quite effectively. In fact, have to have one-to-one tutorials. So I think we will see changes in the pattern of work over the next few years, and maybe we will see an acceleration of certain aspects of the technology industries. So we'll see.
All right, from State Propaganda, DKK 20, the EU will attack Hungary for laws. Quote, look
yes.
over there.
Oh yes, there's no question about it. That's coming.
What do we mean by attack?
I mean, well, that's a very good question, but there's going to be, well, I will tell you what I think is going to happen, Peter. I suspect there's going to be at the very least, legal challenges to the new Hungarian laws in the European Court of Justice. And if that happens, and the European Court of Justice starts ruling that some of these legal changes are incompatible with EU membership, then that will go straight back to the European Council, and we'll see how it plays out there. And there could be fines, and there could be sanctions on Hungarian goods, and all kinds of things of that kind. So I can certainly see that coming.
From Gloria M. Pulido, $10 super chat. What about the Yellow Vest movement? I hear nothing.
No, we don't, because of course that's the other. This is the other bad thing. And can I also say, there was a very interesting piece by, I think it was Craig Murray. I might be wrong, but he was saying, the fact that there is a severe health crisis mustn't mean that we stop thinking about restrictions on civil liberties, the way in which some governments are using the crisis to try to clamp down on dissent. Macron is doing that with a vengeance in France. This has given him the perfect opportunity to stop protests by people like the Yellow Vests. Those kind of protests are impossible now. So he may come out weakened from this crisis, but for the moment, politically, it's playing for him. And that's a very bad thing, in my opinion.
Okay, and the final two super chats from Terry Helton, 199 super chat. Thank you very much, Terry, for that super chat. And the final one is a good one from Dennis W. Roundtree, 82 pounds GBP.
Wow, my goodness. Well, thank you so much. I mean, we've had very generous, very, very generous.
We just got one more to finish it out from Megawatt, 10 euro super chat. What do you think about the TV license fee in the UK? We have them here in Germany too, and they are even more brutal. Even without TV, you have to pay, all in the name of free media.
Even if you don't want it.
Well, I used to support it years ago when I used to watch the BBC. I mean, what was a time when the BBC was exceptional, but I think it's becoming very difficult to support now. I mean, it's indefensible now.
Okay, that's it. We finished it off. Thank you, Spartan Warrior Queen, for that excellent moderation, for helping out. We always appreciate it. Thank you very much to everyone that joined us for this live stream, to all your super chats. Thank you very, very much for those super chats. And thank you very, very much for everyone who liked and shared, and to subscribe to this channel. If you're not subscribed, give it a shot. Subscribe to the channel. You will not regret it. And let's see, Peter, Alexander, anything you want to say while you're in lockdown before we sign off?
Well, I think here in Britain, we're going to have some very difficult days ahead. That is my own sense. And I'm hearing news that our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, his condition has deteriorated, apparently. So we'll see what comes, because there may be political repercussions of that too.
I'll just keep doing more of the same, okay? And I'll see both of you on Crosstalk on Sunday.
Well, indeed. Can I also say, I mean, I will be keeping an eye out on the three most interesting countries at the moment, which are, I mean, Germany's interesting, but also in terms of the ones that are seen to be in the lead, if you like, in responding to this, which are the United States. Clearly, I mean, there's so much goes on in the United States all the time, and how it responds to this and has major political impacts. But also Russia and China. What is China going to do? And is Russia indeed getting on top of this crisis at the moment? Hello.
Okay, and from the Order 1814 at the Duran, from the chat, Zepp Feinstreak is the German military parade, which looks a lot like the SS Marskart. I wanted to make a point to the fact that people are still afraid of Germany.
Yeah.
So that goes back to that super chat.
Absolutely.
That's what the
I think
reference was.
we could have a separate chat about that. Okay.
Yeah, we could definitely do a video or live stream.
I lived in a country that Nazi Germany and their allies inflicted 27 million deaths.
Yes.
During the Second World War. And it was the Soviet Union, or I should rather say it was the soldiers of the Soviet Union, of all nationalities that made up the Soviet Union, that liberated Europe from Nazism. And I've lived here for 22 years, and I've never heard one bad thing about Germany.
Well, this is the remarkable thing, Peter. Russians are not afraid of Germany at all. It's one of the least anti-German places I've ever seen. You have this extraordinary contrast between the way people talk about Germany in Russia and the way people talk about Germany in Britain. Very remarkable.
All right, that's your doorbell's ringing. That's the sign to get moving. That's it. Thank you, Dennis Roundtree. Accurate analysis and great bunch of guys. That's the last comment I'll read. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day wherever you are in the world. Stay safe. Stay at home. Bye-bye.
Bye.